So I feel very privileged today to be here with members of working both with the Army and with the Marines. I just want to preface by saying that the institute that I run is actually an Army-sponsored institute, and we've been in existence since 1999, and we've had a tremendous partnership with the Army during that time. And it was in that context that I met Charlene a few years ago when she came to visit. She met Dr. Saxon in the process, and we've struck up a partnership. Through them, I've met Paul, and I met Colonel Cook today, though I've heard about him for a while because one of my colleagues, Clark Lethine, is a retired Marine and went to war with Warren. And when Warren was the aide-de-camp to General Mattis, who's now the Secretary of Defense. So the theme of our panel is, the title is, where does, sensors above the skin, where does the data go? Warfighters training and deployment. And I'm going to just start by using a quote from the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Milley. He said, "Our fundamental task is like no other. It is to win in the unforgivable crucible of ground combat. Readiness for ground combat is and will remain the U.S. Army's #1 priority. Our most valued assets, indeed the nation's most valued assets, as our soldiers, and our solemn commitment must always be to never send them into harm's way untrained, poorly led, undermanned, or with less than the best equipment we can provide." And he goes on to say that our collective strength depends on our people. Their mental and physical resilience is at our core. So what I'd like the members of the panel to do is talk a little bit about this priority, how wearing sensors and getting data will help our soldiers and Marines to be ready, but perhaps start first by telling us what you do and where you work.
Okay, I guess I'll start. Anyway, thanks for being here, and thanks for having the Army be represented here and the Marines as well. I think it's a great thing to both be up here. So I'm Paul, and I come from the Natick Soldier Center up in the Boston area. We focus on the soldier. Charlene will talk a little bit more about what we do there. I've been part of a large science and technology demonstration program doing analysis and integration, and the last, say, 5 or so months, I've been bringing some of those skills to bear on the area of sensors with the soldier, sensors and the information. So I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of the community at large, operational soldiers as well as scientists and engineers, and to really get at that area of where are the gaps in providing information, actionable, usable information to leaders or individual soldiers, commanders. Where are the gaps in being able to do that? How far are we? So that's where I've been, and anyway, I'll hand it over to Charlene.
Okay. So just a little bit more about the Natick Soldier Research Development and Engineering Center and the Army S&T structure in general. And so our organization actually resides within a non-medical command. And so in that respect, sort of we're talking to an audience that we typically don't talk to, but what a privilege to be here and tell you a little bit about our needs, our gaps, and hope to bridge some new collaborations and partnerships with the expertise that you bring to us. So within the non-medical side of the Army in S&T, there are a number of research, development, and engineering centers, and each of them focus on a platform. So we may have sort of the tank and automotive RDEC. We have the armament RDEC. And in our case, we're the soldier RDEC. And so our platform is the individual warfighter. And so our primary mission is to develop protective technologies, ballistics, flame retardant technologies and the like, so signature management, et cetera, but also to identify biomechanical, physical, and cognitive measures that will allow us to optimize the performance of the soldier. And so as we engage in those activities, resilience, of course, is sort of the flag that we strive to reach. with each and every one of our soldiers. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that as the conversation goes along.
Thank you. Warren.
So I'm in charge of an infantry battalion down at Camp Pendleton. It's about an hour and a half down the street. And I'm in charge of about 1,000 Marines and sailors whose job is to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. We preferably like to compel the enemy to submit to our will, but we will break their will. The preponderance of the 1,000 Marines are 18 to 24 years old. So, and we're training every day in the Marine Corps. The next panel is going to talk about this a little bit more. Every year in the Marine Corps, we turn over 37,000 Marines. So getting Marines up on plane and adept at their job in an efficient fashion so they have the maximum lethality really in the least amount of time is what I'm charged to do. And why we're so pleased about the collaboration we're doing here with Leslie's team, as well as Randy's team, and we're even working with the Clay Helton's team across the street, is, hey, how can we, through science and technology, generate lethality for the young Marine and sailor in a more efficient manner? So that's the collaboration we're up to right now. Great,
thank you. So I'm a big fan of wearable activity sensors, and I've broken my fair share of Fitbits, and I've got a sports watch and all that type of rigmarole. But what kind of sensors, what kind of wearable sensors do you think are going to be most useful in your context, in the Army and the Marines, to begin to measure readiness and to contribute to readiness?
Well, so that's a part of the challenge, really, is I don't think we've defined what sensors we really need to put on a soldier right now. There's certainly some fairly mature sensors, that are out there, but more towards the sports industry or towards the commercial industry being applied to the soldier community. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and hopefully that's some of the collaboration that can happen here is for some of your resources to be put to bear on the military problems. I really thought coming into this and looking at this area that maybe things would be a little bit more defined, that soldiers and operational units would understand and really be able to define what they wanted. But there's really more collaboration that needs to happen between the S&T community in the Department of Defense and outside, and the operational soldier community to define what some of those sensors are. Mm-hmm. And so maybe Charlene will talk a little bit more about some specific sensors. There's core body temperature, and there's heart rate, and there's high hydration, and different things that yes, they could give insights, but really there's more work to be done in how to really not overload and cognitively overload the soldier with just more information from a lot of sensors. Mm-hmm. The challenge really is there's so much work going on. Which of those things really do we portray up to somebody? Yeah.
So you can add to that, and maybe on top of that, who's going to look at this information? Is it the soldier? Is it the leader? And that's something I'm sure Warren would have some thoughts on too.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
We've and I'm going to actually throw that question back to Paul, because he's surveyed some of our units and asked those types of questions. So I'll ask you to do that, but just maybe a bit more on sort of the types of sensors, right? So I think the challenge for us is that the suite of sensors that exist today and that we could conceivably integrate into a soldier's ensemble are oftentimes as Paul mentioned, targeted towards the commercial sector or perhaps the medical sector, where the operational environment is very, very controlled, at least primarily well controlled, maybe not so much for the consumers. But as you think about a warfighter, a soldier, and them executing their mission, that environment is completely unpredictable. It's very dirty. The sensors need to be sustained for very, very long periods of time. We need very reliable, robust data. We're talking about trying to inform and predict decisions that, in fact, are literally life and death decisions. And oftentimes, if if we're going to make a bad call, clearly there are significant consequences there. And so really we are at the stage now where what we're really trying to do in the S&T community is to begin to take the available sensors and evaluate them and try to correlate what is the ROI, what actually is the impact in terms of optimizing performance, better enabling our soldier to execute the mission. How robust are the sensors? Will they sustain the environments that we're looking for? Because ultimately, I think what we want, if we ever do put sensors into the field, I think really what we're looking for is a small number of sensors that have very high positive or negative correlation with performance that we can utilize as predictors to enhance their physical and cognitive performance.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah, Randy, and if I can just pile on a little bit, one stat that every American really should know, and it contextualizes this, is since 2001 and the airplanes hit the towers in the U.S. Marine Corps, 1,231 Marines have been killed in combat since 9/11. 1,231. However, in training since 9/11, 1,446 Marines have been killed. So we're killing more Marines and soldiers in training than in combat. Why does that happen? A lot of times it's fatigue. All right, same thing, somebody piles into the guardrail on the 5 at 3 a.m., probably fell asleep. If there was a wearable out there that could measure how much sleep a Marine or sailor, soldier, airman has had, how rested they are, that's a good thing. That's a good sensor. The other piece, Marines, we go places, we have graduate degrees in walking if you're in the infantry. So we do a lot of hiking. Well, you have to hike with body armor on, which does not allow your body to breathe as well as it does through cutaneous skin. And we're concerned with hydration. So typically, drink 2 cans of water, put them on your head, turn them upside down. That's how a Marine leader measures hydration for their unit. If there's a patch, which Leslie tells me there is, that'd be a great way for a Marine leader or any combat leader to know, hey, are my forces hydrated or not? So 2 examples. I'll throw this caveat, though. It's probably a training wearable because the enemy can sense where we are. We need to be cognizant of the enemy's ability to identify where we are.
That's great. That's good. That was going to be my next question is when would they wear them? During training? Would you have them wear sensors like just in normal everyday life? Are there other everyday life types of activities that you care about? I guess the sleep is one, but
I mean, I would echo the training. Certainly, I would say that there's applicability to training certainly before we put them in combat. It kind of gets to the scale of the Army and the problem. We could put them in combat. We could put sensors on every soldier, or we could just put them on squad leaders, which are over, say, nine soldiers, or we could put them at higher levels only. We could relay that information to the individual soldier or up. There's a lot of different places we could put that. You could also put a sensor on a soldier and when they first join the military and potentially decrease the injury or long-term injury over time by having them be well baselined against themselves and be able to assess what is really happening to them, especially if they're in a situation where they're injured from blast or any other kind of injury. So there's a lot of, I guess, open questions there as to where you would put them, but certainly training appears to be one of the first places.
But Randy and Paul, I think if we can, because Paul's done some research on the cognitive measuring, and the folks should know in the audience that we're at a point now in warfare that we're at a peer with a lot of our adversaries. So we're at a peer level with weaponry. So really, when you have an all-volunteer force, way to get an advantage with that force is between the 6 inches between your ears. How can we outthink the enemy? How can we decide things that are more lethal and more creative than they are with their conscripts? So Paul, maybe you can talk a little bit about the cognitive wearables and kind of studies you've done on that.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in cognitive necessarily, but I've thought a lot about that. Sensors could, soldiers are already cognitively overloaded. And when we're talking about augmenting a soldier with sensors, to me, that seems like you're actually giving them additional data to overload them even more cognitively. And so there's a bucket of information there, and if sensors are taking some of that information and providing it back to those same human sensors, a soldier is a sensor, really. They're the front line on a battlefield that are giving information back up the chain of where the enemy is, what's happening on the battlefield. So they're using their eyes and ears, and then we're talking about augmenting them by putting, giving them additional information. And so it's very important for us to continue the cognitive state and assessment work to better understand and inform like information portrayal technologies and the best way to do that. But it really is also important to distill that information and make it as trustworthy as possible so that ultimately a soldier, they have this much information that they're looking at or hearing. Wouldn't it be great if a subset of that could be, they wouldn't have to worry quite as much about that because the sensors were taking that information, distilling it, clearly articulating it to them in a way that was beneficial to them and trustworthy.
Jumping out of my moderator role for a minute, I can just say that at the Institute, we're developing adaptive tutoring systems that are going to be sensing people as they're learning, and be able to sense whether they're in the zone or the flow as they're learning or not, and be able to prod them either way if they're overstressed or bring them back down and that type of thing. So there is work going on. Not necessarily wearables, but in the context of training that's going.
Yeah, I think, Randy, the interesting piece there is, where do we go now? Where do we go? What target do we look at? Do we think about fully equipping a soldier that's deployed in the battlefield, and make that our aspiring goal, or do we really look at can we use the data from wearable sensors in training scenarios to allow us to educate the soldiers both on their physical performance and their cognitive performance, and help them to be more self-aware of their own bodies and their own responses in unique situations, so that then when they are deployed, they learn to use those skills, and they depend on their own self-awareness to begin to identify when they're putting themselves in, or when they're in a deteriorated state and need some assistance to build themselves up. So I think we're really in very early stages of thinking about what this might look like. Paul's been working and doing a lot of work trying to develop a program that we plan to start in 2019 entitled The Censored Soldier. And we've been asking a lot of these same questions. Unfortunately, we don't have all the answers yet, but and many of the policy issues and ethical issues that come about throughout, when you think about incorporation of these sensors in the battlefield, or even in training, with respect to can we use them to select the right soldier for the right task, are issues that certainly will have to be addressed by Army leadership in the near future.
So go ahead.
Well, I just have one pile on. We can do the performance stuff for cognitive and physical, but also about 20 years ago when I was in an infantry officer course, the Natick Labs issued a number of students camelbacks, which back then were quite new, and they had regulators that measured the flow of water. They gave us heavy water. We took a internal core temperature tablet, and they gave us some pro packs, so supplemental packs included in our ration, and Natick used it to tailor the Defense Department's future menu. So wearables aren't only for this, that we can even help develop the future menu. for soldiers.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Good point.
and that's a good news story to develop
Yeah.
a menu. You know, there's other good news stories like informing body armor using core body temperature pills and sensors and things like that Natick and Usarium have worked on as well. So there's some good news stories on using sensors to inform technology development.
Absolutely. And I think just to address Charlene's point and Paul's point of overloading the individual service member, we like to keep things simple. So just in a hydration study, we've talked to Leslie's team, we would only let the leadership be measuring that data so the service member wouldn't have to be burdened with it. And then the corpsman or the medic could go and say, hey, you're dehydrated, okay? Or hey, let's pull you off the hike, et cetera.
Yeah, it's great.
So we have some time for questions and answers.
So your questions.
We have a hand up here in the middle.
Okay, sir. Yeah.
There's been some public comments about use of artificial intelligence in combat and wars. Do you have any comments concerning that?
I do. A comment I really hear back from the operational community, certainly, and it's similar to what some of the comments I've heard here. Data belongs to the individual, and decisions shouldn't be taken away. So, same thing. Soldiers and soldier leaders should not. The decision should not be taken away from them. Ultimately, just a little bit like a medical professional writes the prescription. Ultimately. It's a very fine balance, and we haven't quite found it yet, I don't think, but distilling the information and providing trustworthy information to someone so they can then make a decision, yes, but just taking decisions away from NCOs and different leaders does not appear to be the right thing to do right now.
So a question. I know you talked about infantry, but has anybody done any research from the panel with pilots? I'm back in the center here.
Oh, sorry.
With pilots, have you done any work? Because I would think that sensors would be an important tool there.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. And in fact, the Air Force Research Laboratory in Dayton, Ohio has assessed a number of wearable sensors for their pilots. And in fact, I think of all of the services, they have the largest database of coupling sensor output with performance and valued outcomes. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to pile on that, the dismounted infantry, they really, if there's a solution for them, they want it to weigh nothing, and take absolutely no power. And yet, the Air Force doesn't have as many of those requirements, and so I think there's a lot of things that we'll be able to learn from the other services that are more mounted to inform a dismounted community.
And maybe, I'd like to add, thank you, Leslie, for pulling us all together, because I think, the message of collaboration and cooperation really, I think, rings true for all of our services, too. There's so much that we can do together, and so us having an opportunity to interface and meet with the Marines that are working with you and learn a bit about what they're doing will help us, I think, as we move forward. So we hope to collaborate with them as well. Thank you.
I think we have another question here in the front.
Yeah, so for a lot of the sensors you were talking about, it sounded like physical sensors where you can do a very immediate intervention. So someone's dehydrated, you give them some more water. If a soldier's having a mental breakdown over time, what sort of intervention techniques have you guys looked at for that? And also, how do you evaluate if an emotional or mental breakdown is happening over time and determine when to intervene?
Some thoughts on
I
that?
haven't seen a sensor that can measure that.
No.
Well, how about for intervention?
Well, so I
Well,
could just.
are you familiar with Cooper's color codes? Okay. Well, I'm not going to kill the cat here, but basically it's a way of categorizing one's mental state. If you're in the black, which you're referring to, then that service member can no longer do his or her job. So it's an intimate business, the infantry, and fighting. So chances are one man or woman to your left or right is going to recognize that because they're going to know your normal state if you're in the yellow, for example, or the green, and pull you off the line. So just like you would if you get in an argument or your kid has a meltdown and there's so much myelin in their brain, you're going to take about 15 to 20 minutes before you can actually function cognitively again. but just neurologically, you're not going to be able to do anything. So what we've done with Leslie's team here is educated Marines surrounding the neurology of that. When you go in the black, you're going to be worthless for 15, 20 minutes. Doesn't matter if you're 5 years old or you're 50 years old. So get them off the line. All right, and then you can get them back in the fight.
Sounds a lot like Paul's comment about the soldiers, the sensor, the Marines, the sensor. You're sensing not only yourself, but your colleagues. And some of the work at the Institute, there's a guy named Stefan Shearer who may be here who's been doing research on listening to the prosody of the voice and being able to pick up depression and other, there may be other emotional states that you can pick up. And there are also work on looking at, doing facial tracking and body language and being able to begin to discern the emotional state. Now, it may not be something that's practical to use on the battlefield, but it may be in a calmer environment where someone's having a more enduring kind of a resilience issue.
Hi there. So just, in football, it took a while, including movies with Will Smith, to kind of, come to grips with things that were happening all around. But until they had data on concussions and started to really be able to investigate, it wasn't taken, seriously. And institutionally and culturally, there was a pushback. For them, they had a financial conflict there, but so very different than the services. But the culture issue, it seems to me, is kind of interesting because we want our young Marines, soldiers, sailors, servicemen, women to be able to tough it out. And at the same time, we want them to also accept the fact you got to take a break. And so you're fighting this, and you're dealing with young people. So the notion that I'm going to be looked upon negatively, that I'm a wimp or I'm not as strong or as capable. How are the sensors going to, and acceptance of the sensors, going to kind of come together with the culture of accepting what could be, different outcomes for the individual soldier, sailor, Marine?
Yeah, great question. I think we're all in it for the same reasons, and we want high performance, which in our business equals lethality. So if the sensors can educate the team members that, hey, if you're putting out this kind of sensor and it's going to be a degradation to the team and you're dead weight, not helping us, then they're going to know already, whether it's looking at their Fitbit 10 years from now or whatever, hey, I'm out, you guys go in. So I think right now the machismo, the alpha maleness, if you break down one's ability to make a decision or act in a certain state after 95 Gs, for example, from a football hit, and you get your bell rung and you're in a concussed state, and they're going to know the science behind it, hey, they're not going to feel bad taking a knee, and frankly, their teammates know this is a long war, and if we can get them healed up and back in the fight, it's going to help us, because we don't have just add water service members. It takes a long time to train somebody, so if he's out of the fight for 3 months, he can be back on the line, great. That's our job right now, to hold the line.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panel, very much.
Absolutely.